Welcome to the second installment of the Masterclass series with the Facilitator's Tool Chest from the Family Peace Initiative. And today I'm really looking forward to you listening to our conversation with Jim Elsaesser. He's from the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Intervention Program. And what we've been covering in the Family Peace Initiative is trying to address the challenge of emotional restricted expression. Dr. Natalie Hoskins, who was with us, years ago at this point, had really informed us about the domestic violence as a form of communication and the problem of restricted emotional expression with those who are using cruelty. And Jim has brought to us a way to help expand and address emotional restricted expression through emotional writing. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And thanks so much for all you do. Let's get started with my conversation with Jim Elsaesser. Welcome and thanks for checking in on our masterclass segment of the Facilitator's Tool Chest. And today we are really, really lucky to have Jim Elsaesser with us from Pennsylvania, or from New Jersey via Pennsylvania. I don't know how that all works. I tell you, I was lucky enough to meet Jim. He was willing to come to the facilitator training series with us with the Family Peace Initiative. And once he completed all three of the segments of that, he wanted to sit in on some of our groups just to see how it works in action. And then he started talking about this idea of expressive and poetic writing to be able to apply this to the work that we're doing with those trying to build an internal focused dialogue. And so Jim said, eventually we agreed, hey, Jim, let's just give it a go. Let's just take a crack at it and let's see how it works, And so, Jim, you came to the class and you did this really simple, but I would argue this profound writing exercise with the class. And it was really cool how the group responded and got into a internal focused dialogue without a lot of defenses, right? Without a lot of protective devices. They were just able to enter that space through your writing prompts and through your invitation for them to just explore and come to what comes to mind for them. I just want to hand it over to you and just say, Jim, what do you want people to know about this, and how do you see it being applied to the intervening with cruelty?
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me. It's an honor to be here and share what gifts I've been given along the way in terms of what expressive writing can be and how that applies to batterer intervention programs. So I think for me, poetry has always been an exploration of the internal world, how it meets with the external world. It's a very simple format in some ways, but a very complex in others, right? And that idea, like you said, about how folks in that group started writing things that were deeply personal and really powerful. One fellow writing about being in Afghanistan, other folks writing about relationships with grandparents and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think the gift that poetry offers us is a gift that we're all born with. And that's a gift of telling our story. And I think so many times in our lives, we've had a story kind of dictated to us about who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to look like, dress like, act like, what we can do, what we can't do. And a lot of times, in terms of the internal world, when we don't have the opportunity to express ourselves, some of our story can become compressed and distorted, like those adverse feelings we talk about in the river of cruelty. Those feelings of, I can't express my anger, I can't express my frustration, I can't express my fear. And those things live in us. So I like to tell groups that, we have this thing called a brain, and it has a way of telling a story. And a lot of times that story is just full of crap. and it's kind of etched into our psyche, who we are, what other people are, things we can love, things we can fear. And it's not really what the whole story is for us. And poetry offers us that opportunity to share that story in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, I was really amazed, and my own experience because I participated in what you presented with the group, and I'm really self-conscious about writing and creative, and I could feel myself kind of this, oh my gosh, what are people going to think about what I write? And
Uh-huh,
uh,
uh-huh,
but I was really surprised at how easy it was once I got past, once the activity got going, once we started, when you invited us to just start writing, how easy it was to just get past that self-consciousness
uh-huh,
and enter this world of curiosity of I wonder what might come out of this, right? I wonder
uh-huh.
what I might discover about myself or unlock about myself that I haven't thought about too much. And it really, really, really interesting to experience that. You talk about this a lot. You talk about how writing will unlock things and will kind of help us to get past some defenses. And that was literally what I experienced in the 30 minutes that you had
Uh-huh.
with our class that afternoon.
Yeah. When you talk about these things we tell ourselves, that's part of the crap. I can't, I'm not, I never will be. This isn't, I like this, I don't like all that stuff we tell ourselves. But the creative impulse that we all have, I mean, we're born with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it gets shuttered. So I kind of deal with that with what I call my 10 non-negotiable rules for writing poetry, which are, Steve, rule number one, no apologies for anything you write. Number one, because we're really good at doing just what you said.
Yeah.
We have an academically oriented mind of what's what the teacher wants to hear, or what's the right thing to say, or the wrong
That's
thing to
right.
say, all that stuff. So no apologies for anything you write is rule number one. Have fun! Exclamation point is rule number two. And I forgot the other eight rules, so let's just go with those two.
No
And it's it.
apologies and have fun, and then eight other
Yeah,
rules that we're not going to worry about.
yeah. If you look on the feeling wheel, creativity and play are side by side, right?
Yeah.
And when we can play, we feel safe. We can play with words. We can play with experiences. And I have to tell you, that 10 years ago when I started at the agency where I work now, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Assault Intervention Services, Daisy in Newton, New Jersey, and I was invited to facilitate workshops with survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence. I wrestled with the idea of how can I go in there and tell folks, hey, have fun?
Right. Right.
And because this isn't fun stuff. Um, but a very wise friend of mine, a retired psychologist named Ed Rosenbaum, said, Jim, just present your material, let people tell their story, and get out of the way.
Yeah.
And I think this is, on its deepest level, storytelling. And that's how we really fundamentally heal and grow and learn. Um, so it's not a story I'm seeing on a screen, and it's not somebody else's story. It's my pen, my paper, my story, and nobody else's.
That's right. And I love that it's so connected with what the Family Peace Initiative has thought for quite some time about how can we learn to be less afraid of our own stories and so any opportunities and pathways that we can find to help people get into those stories, make some sense of what happened and what the experiences were, and become less afraid and more understanding of what happened to us helps us to move forward more peacefully in the future,
Mhm.
which is what makes me excited about this stuff, is that it's a really nice doorway into people's stories without just a whole lot of legwork. It's an invitation to, and yeah, yeah. I'm really looking forward to you sharing a little bit about okay, what do we do? What was it or what do you do when you go in there with a group and you're going to invite them into one of these processes? How do you set it up beyond the 10 rules?
Well, I share some thoughts on sharing healing poetry. And some of my background, I've been kind of obsessed with poetry for a long, long time and written a lot and been in conferences and workshops and writing groups and facilitated different groups. Um, but it's always been part of my life in terms of how to look outside of myself and look inside of myself. So how do I do it? I have some thoughts on sharing healing poetry. One of the things I've learned along the way in terms of healing poetry from the Family Peace Initiative and from also the Institute for Poetic Medicine, I've learned so much from John Fox and his folks in terms of healing poetry is just write the way you speak. Don't worry about word choice or punctuation or spelling, because worrying doesn't pay any better. Don't worry about worrying, doesn't pay any better. Making sense is not a priority. We're living in poetry, and it's just a matter of recording it.
Yeah.
Wonderful poet by Naomi Shihab Nye stated that maybe what we have to do is live in a word in a way that helps us find the poems that are part of our world. Right? And so I just have some fun with those thoughts on sharing healing poetry. Write the way you speak. Don't worry about word choice. Making sense is not a priority. Refuse to follow directions. If you feel like writing something, just write it and let it go. Fill up a page, right?
Yeah.
And most importantly of all, to treat ourselves with kindness in the process. So yeah, I had those thoughts, and then I'll have a series of quotes that folks will get to read out loud.
Yeah.
And one of my favorites is poetry is the work of opening the heart by Rumi. This guy wrote this like 800 years ago, right? Robert Frost said, if I know at the top of the page what I'm going to say at the bottom, I'm doing it all wrong, because poetry is exploration and discovery. It's fine. I might have a preconception about what I want to say, but as I start thinking or start writing, the experience has a voice of its own, and I might not be in touch with that at a conscious level, but it's living inside of me, right? And it comes out. And to that point, I'll say, I've shared this story many times, that 10, 11 years ago, I was leading a workshop in my hometown, Stroudsburg, where I live. And this 92-year-old guy, it was a fill in the blank kind of Mad Lib thing. Think of a family member. My blank said to me, blank, we were blank and blank. And he didn't follow directions, but his poem was, he stood up and said, a friend once told me that time moves on for every man, but for you it stands still. The bombs and bullets still fly, and you forever die. So Dave Wilner, this 92-year-old, very gentle man, was writing about being in Normandy in World War II. And he didn't walk into that room thinking, oh, I'm going to write a story about Normandy. I'm not going to, it's just that was where the poem wanted to go.
Right.
Right. And he had the safety, the opportunity to share that. The follow-up of that is, for the next 3 weeks, Dave told me he'd woken up the next morning and dreamed the poems, so he wrote them down. So in his 90s, this guy wrote like 5 chapbooks of poetry.
Oh my goodness.
It was all about his life, his family, those sorts of things, but they were his, right?
And from a trauma-focused perspective, if we're working with people at battered intervention, it's really difficult to help people feel safe enough to be able to talk about those traumas from 100 years ago or 80 years ago, right? And in this little simple poetic tool, you were able to access a part of his story that it may have been hard for him to access in other ways so profoundly. I mean, that poem is just, elicits so many pictures in my mind when I hear it.
And that's what it can do. As a wonderful colleague, Dr. Proslin St. Armand, said once, how the image of poetry is landing in the same part of the brain where the image of memory is living. And we have all these files stored away. And here they are, like shining at this opportunity to put something on the pen and page is shining a light on that image, and here it comes back.
Yeah.
And it's similar to speaking, but it's very, very unlike speaking in many ways. It's a physical process of hand-eye coordination, moving a pen apart, and it elicits things from us. I led a GED class a few years ago with a coworker, Nina, and myself, and there were 12 boys and one girl. And this girl, I'll say her initials GB, wrote in a poem, "Poetry is a feeling, and we're not prepared to feel it."
Yeah,
Poetry is a feeling, and we're not prepared to feel it. Now, that poem we used was Things to Think by Robert Bly. And if you
that's
folks
right.
read that poem, but there's a couple lines in there like, think that maybe somebody brings a bear to your door and it's wounded or and deranged, or think that a child has risen a child of your own whom you've never seen before has risen out of a lake on the antlers of a moose, that sort of thing. And it's like, huh? It
That's
doesn't,
right.
but some of the reactions I've had from that particular poem, say, for instance, years ago in a Daisy poetry group with the survivors, a woman in her 60s got like red in the face with her fists balled and emotional and said, "I know what this is. I know what it is, but I don't have the words for it." Said that wounded bear, that's what happened to me when I was a little girl. And a few minutes later, another participant said, "Yeah, and that child rising out of the lake on the moose's antlers, that's me leaving my past life and going into my new one."
Oh my.
And
Yeah.
I I thank them for like giving me an answer to this poem that I never had before, right? It's our experience and our interpretation that leads to the
Yep.
grace of the creation of something new out of that. But I think the poems give us permission to think in ways we haven't thought before, to feel and express our feelings. And sometimes they come out in images, recollections, flashes of a moment.
Mhm.
They're deeply experiential, but they're relational. I kind of look at the page as a place, a meeting place between my inner world, or the writer's inner world, and the world out there. And this is where we come, like in a safe place to say what we have to say. The beauty of it is, and the power of it is in the group where folks identify with other people's experiences, reactions, adverse feelings, ways of
Mhm.
coping,
Mhm.
uh, you know, unintended consequences, all those things we talk about in the river of cruelty. And, gives them safety to say those things.
Yeah, I think it's such a cool pathway. And yeah, when you presented not long ago at the TBIP meeting, you shared some examples of exploring the shadow and the golden shadow message through some poetic writing that I
Mhm.
thought was just brilliant way for people to invite people to explore their own internal belief systems.
Mhm.
I didn't know, is that something that you could share here? Is that
Yeah,
you have
absolutely.
permission from those writers to do that or?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just use the guy's initials, but so here's an example of some of the writing prompts that I put together out of the facilitator's guide from the Family Peace Initiative and some of the work we do at the side program, um, in concert with Family Peace Initiative. So, for example, here's one from the River of Cruelty, and this is kind of a Mad Lib, which I love to use in groups.
What did you call
So,
that? A Mad Lib?
Mad Lib, yeah,
Mad
it's
Lib?
like those things from years ago, like these books you can get and fill in the blanks and have fun with it. There's some
Okay.
beautiful books that have like prompts like this, that we could talk about too. So I just took, for the guys, this idea of the shadow message. Shadow message is the original message received from someone who made us feel small, dirty, humiliated, or shamed. All the adverse feelings we wake up hoping not to feel, which is from your um, facilitator's tool chest.
Mhm.
Write about the first time you received the shadow message and fill in the blank. Write whatever you want to write. So this was the prompt I was blank when I was blank into the river. I remember blank, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then here's the golden shadow message. Think of a time someone helped you, told you you had value, maybe even praised you. That person was your enlightened witness. That person gave you something that may seem very small now, but was important. They gave you the golden shadow message. Describe that person, who they were, what they said. And again, very short prompt. I remember he, she was, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, um, here's Glenn G. I was 6 to 13 when I was thrown into the river of cruelty. I remember being scared, not scared to fight, but scared I was going to get into a fight. The anxiety of not knowing. I couldn't run away. We were, I can picture being in school. I was too scared to think, but I was thinking of a way to get home today. This was the beginning of the hardening, the callousing of the heart. He was an angry kid brought up like me with prejudice. He had a voice that sounded mean, serious. The hardening happened. I lost the fear of fighting. I learned to stand my ground. My brother told me to shake it off, get back into the fight. No sympathy, no love, with a voice of cruelty. I tried to, even though all that, even through all that, I tried to be happy. I was just a kid. But because these things callous you, you grow up too fast. I think I was ignorant to all the violence, the anger everyone had then. And now I realize that I am not any of that. I've shaken that off.
Hmm.
I'm a loving, concerned brother to anyone who asks, sharing the good. That's Glenn's poem.
That's such an amazing snapshot, right?
Mm,
How does somebody get that hardened heart and have to survive the circumstances that they're faced with, and a bit of the journey to get, and like Alice Miller talks about, trying to get our perfection back after
mm,
surviving the challenges that he was faced with,
yeah, yeah. Um, it's amazing to me how the trauma has this energy, this power, and this voice that wants to be heard, and
Yeah.
how it's found different ways of expressing itself or defending itself, right?
Hmm.
And perpetuating that river of cruelty is part of that.
Hmm.
The perspective that offers like a different perspective of seeing my life from a different viewpoint, and
Yeah.
to be in a group and to have other people validate that. It's not condoning what we've done, but it's understanding, kind of like you said, where we come from and our story and the fear we've
Yeah.
held that story in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see what else we got here. River of cruelty. I was 5 when I was kicked into the river of cruelty. I remember my father yelling at my brother and me, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" right before he smashed the Nintendo and the 13-inch black and white TV. We were just two little brothers arguing over the same toy. My dad had a voice that sounded like a mind numbing, ear piercing roar, like a lion.
Mm.
Devastation happened. My dad yelled there was something wrong with me. I tried to escape, but there was no way out. I thought I was defective then, but now I realize I was mistreated. Even more than that, I was abused.
Yeah. That's
Mhm,
a powerful shift in the river of cruelty, because we tend to blame ourselves, right?
mhm.
Oh, it must be me. This is a defective one.
Um, well, there's the adverse feeling, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things I absolutely love about what I've learned from you, Steve, and the Family Pace Initiative is that these adverse feelings are super powerful. And how you said in
That's right.
your tool chest talk, we'll destroy ourselves, we'll destroy our families, we'll just not to feel that feeling of being defective. Or
Hmm.
I think it's important to point out too, like you said, it's just a few lines, right?
Hmm.
Which poetry is like this condensed,
Yeah.
narrative that's telling like this expansive story. What was the father about? What was going on with him? What
Hmm.
were the two kids? How old were they? What was, that typical squabble? Devastation happened. My father yelled, there was something wrong with me. I tried to escape, but there was no way out. You're that age where you're going to go, right? It's trauma, the definition, that feeling of terror from which you feel like there's no escape.
That's
But I
right.
think the thing that's really important to point out, this isn't like some big intellectual process to create these things. This is a very kind of, I don't know, to create these things is pretty practical.
Yeah.
Fill in the blank,
Yeah.
let people tell their story.
No, you've used this in a variety of different places, right? We're talking
Hmm.
about it, the application to battering intervention, but you've
Hmm.
used it with a bunch of different groups. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I guess I'll stop sharing. Huh? Yeah, I've used it for the past 4 years. We've worked at a behavioral health center called Bridgeway, and folks with different diagnoses, and they've written some amazing things. We just wrote a book of poetry out of them and had a reading, and John Fox was there. It was great, and they're just extraordinary. High school kids, GED classes. Um, did an Upward Bound group at a local East Stroudsburg State University for some summers doing that, and also for under-resourced folks, called Seasons of Healing. And this stuff communicates,
Yeah.
and it's as much, I think, the importance of the group being able to share things, given permission, and share things they could never share before.
And
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 that's
and Jim, when people share the things that they've never been able to share before, what do you see in the different groups that you're using these strategies with? What's the outcome? What's the long-term effect of
mm,
people, sharing these things together?
um, that's a great question. I think it's multidimensional. It's the individual, quote unquote, finding their voice,
Mhm.
for particularly for women who have been abused for or been dealt with abuse for years, decades. They find an inner strength and inner voice and inner power that they weren't granted before, that had stuffed down, pushed away, which I think speaks to, when we're talking about victims, we're talking about this, batterers too, in a
That's right.
sense, in a larger sense, right? Of things that are pushed down, shut up, sheltered, especially for guys who have that very narrow emotional range where they want to be able to express things. Um, Different feelings come out. And out of that, I think the change in the group is a real sense of bonding and understanding and community,
Yeah.
which I think is really an important part of our batterers intervention programs.
Oh,
That
agreed. Yeah.
I have a place where I am safe and can share, and I'm understood, and I'm not having a finger pointed at me or accused. I mean, we talk about accountability, and that's a reality, right?
Hmm.
This isn't a panacea by any means. It is an adjunct to programs,
Hmm.
but it is a way to really, I guess, to get back to your question, to focus on an internally focused dialogue and
Yeah.
what's going on in me and what's going on for my whole life, how I've interpreted that, how it's manifested itself in different behaviors. Um, and that's part of the growth process. We've had folks stand up and read in front of 80 or 100 people in our different groups. And I said, it's hard enough to get up in front of a group of people and read a grocery list. So here you are going to pour your heart out onto a page, right? But part of that shaking is the joy of this. And I've heard you say too, like dysregulation. Before there can be regulation, there has to be sort of dysregulation,
Yeah.
and that's part of this work too. The upset, the nervousness,
Mhm.
the tumult, but the guts to come through. Or I think I would be remiss if I didn't point out that, yeah, there have been times when folks have become dysregulated and activated and overwhelmed and tears and very emotional. And I'd have to say it's the group as much as anybody who helps that person through.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of that long-term understanding that I'm not alone in this. And while I've never been able to say these things before, and I'm saying them now, and there's like a level of embarrassment or like, oh my God, did I really just, disclose these things? It's okay.
Yeah.
This is the place, and we hold that place in that safe container.
Yeah.
I was actually looking through the facilitator's guide, and there are like every lesson plan has like enormous possibilities for doing this kind of work. Like I was looking at cruelty. I was cruel when I said, I thought, I told her, and it's an opportunity for some folks, I think, who are hesitant to speak, to put it on a page.
Yeah.
And it's another avenue of getting to what we're trying to get to, and that's.
Jim, is there anything for facilitators or professionals who are going out there and going to try this? You'll say, oh, I just heard Jim talk about this. I think I want to take a crack at it. Do you have any words of wisdom for them? Do you have anything? All right, feel free to do it, but keep these things in mind. Or
That's a great question, and I have to pause a second to think. I would say get involved with any kind of local poetry group at like a library. Get a sense of what it is. Understand that this isn't like some intellectual ivory tower stuff. You can get in some really deep stuff just through some very practical steps. And it can be exciting, fun. It can be trying, but it's deeply rewarding. I have plenty of resources I can offer. You share my contact information, and I just love to talk to folks and give this a try.
Well, it's been really good to see you again, Jim. Thanks for giving me an hour of your time here to kick this around some more.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us for this edition of the Family Peace Initiative's Masterclass series. Every now and again, we just put out one of these extended videos to showcase the innovation and the expertise and the important tools that we can all benefit from in our efforts to try to reduce cruelty and end domestic violence. Thanks so much. Feel free to subscribe to our channel if you find this information interesting, and we look forward to putting out another one of these soon.